May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Throughout the summer and the fall, we have watched as Jesus made his way from Galilee up to Jerusalem. 3 times he told his disciples that when he gets to Jerusalem, he will be arrested, he'll be tortured, he'll be crucified, and on the 3rd day he will rise again. And each time the disciples did not either believe him, or they didn't understand him, or they didn't want to believe him. They just went off doing something totally unexpected in response. Well, we get to our gospel today, and we finally find ourselves in Jerusalem. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, he went up to the temple and overturned the tables of the money changers there. And then he taught in the temple, had disputes with the religious leaders, both Pharisees and Sadducees, who were trying to trip him up and catch him in something so that they might dispense with him, shall we say. In our gospel today, he's sitting there with his disciples watching the goings-on in the temple area, the area of the Gentiles. And he sees a number of people come along, a number of men who put money into the treasury. Now, they're not collecting an offering like we do, somebody coming down the aisle with a plate and everything is quiet. They put in money into these large receptacles, which were like horns. I envision it like a tuba. And if you put a large sum of coins in there, the noise of it going down would be amplified significantly, so that everybody would stop and turn and look. It's like going to Las Vegas. If you play the slot machines and you win, there are bells that are going to go off, there are whistles that are going to go off, and there will be the sound of this money pouring out. And everybody will stop what they're doing and will turn and look to see who won and how much. And so it is here. The money goes in, it clangs a great deal, particularly if a rich person has put in a lot of coin, and people look and they walk away proud. Jesus sees this happen a number of times. But then he also sees this little widow coming along. She is in total contrast to these rich people. And she puts in 2 copper coins, which we're told are together are worth a penny. And he calls his disciples and he says, this woman has put in more than all the others because she has put in all that she has. The others have given out of their abundance, but she has given everything she has. Countless sermons have been written on stewardship using this story today of the widow. Undoubtedly, it fits nicely, you see, because it comes at that time of the year when churches are preparing a stewardship program for the following year. And so it's like next Sunday the church is asking us to bring our pledge cards to church so that we can plan ahead for 2019. However, to take this story I think is an injustice to it. Because nowhere, you see, does Jesus follow up and say, this is how you are to give. This is how the church ought to be treated, you giving your last penny. Now, St. Paul, who wrote half of the New Testament, doesn't speak like this. You know, there are churches, and you've heard this too, who tithe. A tithe is normally considered to be 10% of someone's income. But nowhere in the New Testament is a tithe mentioned. Jesus doesn't mention it. St. Paul doesn't speak about giving of tithes. The tithe is something that developed in the Old Testament, and particularly as they were thinking about getting a king. The people were warned, you're going to have to give money to support the king. You're going to have to give a tithe. And the tithe normally reflected on the produce that one gleaned from the wheat or barley or whatever they grew, as well as a tenth of the livestock that they had. But it is not reflected like that in the New Testament. Paul talks about making sure that you have enough to sustain your life. You have food, you have clothing, you have shelter. Beyond that is a surplus that comes in, and you should take from that and give to the church. He also talks about helping other people in the congregation who need it. In other words, who need the main things: food, shelter, clothing. Help them have that. But nowhere does he talk about socialism. Nowhere does he talk about everyone should have the same amount that everyone else has. He realizes the reality that there are people who are richer than others, some very rich. But the more you have, the more responsibility you have. And you can share with others from your bounty. And this is what the New Testament speaks about in terms of giving. And so, yes, you know, we are asking that you look at your pledge and that you are generous with the church so that we can continue. But nowhere are we asking for you to deplete whatever you have to sustain yourself. And Jesus doesn't do that here either, you see. If you take this little story and isolate it, you might be able to make a big deal out of it. But you can't isolate it. And when he finishes the story, he doesn't go on to talk about stewardship. He's not thinking stewardship, you see. What is he thinking? He's thinking that he's got a couple of more days to live. And then what he predicted, his arrest, his torture, his crucifixion, will occur. Immediately following this story, the disciples are looking at the vastness of the temple. The stones they cut to put this together were enormous. And these country bumpkins from Galilee have never seen anything like this. They're looking all over. You know, it's like people coming from the Midwest to New York for the first time. They're looking up because the buildings are so tall. You don't have this in any other city. It's not in Philadelphia or Miami or Los Angeles or San Francisco. It's in New York, and you look up at the wonder of it. And so they're looking at this. So, you know, to take this story out of context and make a stewardship story out of it is not legitimate. So what is the story about? We go back and look at it. And like I said, Jesus is concerned about his imminent death. This is what's on his mind. And as he looks at what is happening here, he sees that the only place in Jerusalem that reflects what he is about to do is this little lady. She comes and gives the last of what she has. And what is Jesus going to do? He is going to give the last. He's going to give his last 2 copper coins, shall we say. He's going to give up his life. And so we have here an acted parable. Jesus' parables at the end particularly speak about what his death means. And it speaks about his death itself. Here it's not spoken, it's a living parable, shall we say, that reflects what's going to happen on the cross. Last week at our banquet, as we were eating, Dennis sent me a picture of a t-shirt that's available. It's something, you know, we should probably all buy and wear. It's a t-shirt that had all of our superheroes on it. Superman, Batman, Robin, Aquaman, Spider-Man, a bunch of others. And some of them are sitting, some of them are standing, and in the center is Jesus in a white robe sitting. And the balloon above his head says, and that is how I saved the world. It's a very colorful shirt, and I think it's right on. You see, we're not saved by power. We need power in the world. I mean, we need power to put out the fires in California. We need power to operate our cars and to put heat into our homes. We need power to suppress an enemy who would attack us. But when we're talking about God, God isn't interested in our power. Our power isn't going to save us. Our moralism isn't going to save us. Our spiritualism isn't going to save us. What saves us, what brings us close to God, is the act of Jesus dying, through which we are forgiven. And thereby the relationship with us and God that had been fractured is now mended. Power can do a lot of things to, quote, save us in this world. But when we're talking about God, the power to mend the relationship, the power to bring us into God's good graces, comes only through this event in Jesus' death and in Jesus' resurrection. There it is. And so this little lady who puts in the last of what she has represents in all of Jerusalem is the only thing that represents what is to come. Amen. The peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Let us continue with the singing of our next hymn, 761.